Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Philippa Parks. I'm a professor at the University of Sherbrooke, and today I'll be presenting the Inter-University Collective for Language Competency in Education, the ICLE, on behalf of my research team. Notez que cette présentation serait bilingue, en anglais et en français. Donc, lorsque les diapositives sont en français, j'expliquerai en anglais et le contraire. So please note that this is a bilingual presentation. When slides are in one language, I will be speaking in the other, French or English. So let's get started with an overview, un survol. We're going to begin by talking about the introduction and contexts, looking at les défis, les buts et les objectifs du projet, ensuite les ressources qu'on avait mis à votre disposition, quelques questions et constats qui sont survenus, et ensuite les orientations futures. So we're going to begin by talking about Quebec and the situation here. Quebec's relative isolation as the uniquely French-speaking population within a sea of English speakers in North America means that the survival of the French language has become a major social preoccupation in Quebec, as these headlines can attest, talking about the survival of French. The preoccupation with the survival of French is also reflected in the Quebec education program, seen here, where oral and written mastery of the language of instruction is recognized as a cornerstone skill for educators. The directives for the teacher education program, known as the Référentiel de compétences professionnelles pour la profession enseignante, emphasizes the pivotal role of language as one of the two foundational competencies. So ici, c'est agir en tant que médiatrice de culture et maîtriser la langue d'enseignement, culture and language. There are many types of language that future teachers must master, but the ones that this project focuses on are oral and written language for professional uses and especially for academic literacy. Les défis. Faculties of education across the province face the challenge of providing adequate language proficiency training for their future teachers, especially around the French language. And this is because in Quebec, future teachers, regardless of their level or specialization, must pass a ministry-regulated language exam as a requirement in order to get their teaching license. Various initiatives and programs have been established to help students meet the language proficiency, but most of these have been focused on passing that language test. However, our group is concerned because language proficiency encompasses more multidimensional aspects that are beyond just linguistic codes like spelling and mechanics. Existing teacher education programs differ in the ways that they address different kinds of language-related needs, and variations in training can arise due to the broad spectrums of teaching methods across different institutions. Finally, the digital age presents new challenges, including plagiarizing and the appropriation of multimodal messages, and the rise of artificial intelligence. So it's within these contexts that the Carrefour interuniversitaire sur les compétences en langue d'enseignement, the CICLE, was conceived of by Professor Olivier Desuder from Sherbrooke University. The intention of this project was to address language quality in future teachers, thereby ensuring that these teachers would maintain high standards as linguistic models in oral and written language for their own future students. The project involved all 12 universities in Quebec. There are 9 Francophone universities and 3 Anglophone universities. All 12 universities worked together to establish the Inter-University Collective, and we believe that by pooling our expertise and resources, we could ensure a high level of language mastery across all teacher education programs. Les cibles. The targets for this project are people who are deeply involved in the education of future teachers. That is, teacher educators and, of course, lecturers and professors. The aspect that the project focuses on specifically are language skills in French and in English, both for higher education but also for the teaching profession. It's important to note that these language skills are not just written, but also oral competency skills, so speaking. There are 6 main objectives for this project. However, the objective I'm focusing on for this presentation today is the last one, which is disseminating the results of the project and promoting the platform to its target beneficiaries, people watching this video. We began the project by conducting a survey of existing resources, so what actually exists already so that we don't end up reinventing the wheel. So we combed through the websites of all our partner universities looking for any kind of language resources, things that would help future teachers develop their linguistic competency in French or in English. And this survey resulted in 498 different resources that we found. These included links to external resources, so language resources that exist outside of the universities, and many of these were duplicated. Links to internal resources, so things that each university had individually prepared. Many of these were found in the form of PDFs. And also links to workshops offered online or in person at the various universities. The next step was to regroup the resources under 4 specific categories that we use in this project. These were mastering linguistic codes, academic literacy, professional use of the language, and a relationship to the language. You can find all of these resources under our website, which is here, the CICLE ICLE, so the CICLE ICLE. Please note that this link is still, and the website is still under construction, so things are being updated very regularly, and we encourage you to check back regularly and see what has changed. So while we were sorting and classifying through the resources, we made some observations and notations about the kind of resources that could be found according to the language and culture of the institution. So we had, again, 9 partner universities in French and 3 in English, and we noticed right away that there was some definite imbalances in the way that attention was paid to each of these categories. So the first thing we noticed was that the relationship to language, what we call le rapport à la langue, appears to be a uniquely French concept, or at least it does not appear to translate into Anglophone educational culture. In French universities, the small number of resources that were dedicated to the rapport à la langue also indicates there's a lack of attention in those universities. There is, therefore, as De Waal notes, an opportunity for French and English universities to develop that emotional and relational aspect of languages in teacher education. Next, we found that there was a systematic overlap between resources that were categorized as professional uses and those that focused on general language mastery. In other words, it was very difficult to find resources specifically dedicated to the linguistic contexts of teaching. For example, it was hard to find any terms that were specifically about teaching or teaching concepts, or even more pragmatic language use, such as how to give clear written or oral instructions. While language relating to teaching can be considered highly specific and contextualized, which might be one of the reasons we didn't find it there, it does not mean that that kind of language cannot be taught. And if we take examples in other domains, such as law, we can find exercises such as how to write a legal brief. So we'd like to see more of that in education. There's an opportunity to explore why education lacks similar resources for professional language use, and an opportunity to create more linguistic support in that area. The lack of tailored resources for the professional language needs of teaching really represents a gap that could be addressed through dedicated materials and teaching. Drawing from examples in other fields, developing contextualized language and resources for educators could really enhance their ability to communicate effectively in their professional roles. The next thing that we noticed is that there's a significant difference in the kind of attention that French language and English language universities pay to language resources for different purposes. If we present the results in a graph, we can more easily note the preoccupation of the English-speaking universities with academic literacy, with 64% of the resources surveyed pertaining to university literacy. In Francophone universities, the numbers are nearly evenly split between resources intended to help master linguistic codes and resources supporting academic literacy. And this discrepancy highlights how Francophone universities balance general language proficiency alongside academic literacy skills. In contrast, Anglophone institutions seem to largely focus on cultivating academic literacy. And it appears that general English proficiency is less of a concern for them. Francophone universities face the added challenge of catering to students who may need support in mastering the fundamentals of the French language itself, in addition to developing advanced academic writing. One reason we postulate why French language institutions may dedicate more resources to the mechanical aspects of language learning is that historically Francophones have a cultural preoccupation with linguistic norms. Culturally, the French language is seen as static and pure, something to be guarded and protected to maintain its superiority. Hence, the ability to understand and to adhere to linguistic norms can be employed as a source of authority and an indication of education and status, as Frère would note. The French attitude towards language contrasts to English culture, where there has been a wider recognition of world Englishes, karachu, and a wider acceptance of varieties of the English language. So the posture of the English culture towards language seems to be less concerned with maintaining linguistic standards than it is in French. Traditionally, French language institutions have paid more attention to ensuring the linguistic codes are met. However, they're now turning their attention to academic literacy, as we saw in the previous slide. There's a balance now between linguistic codes and academic literacy. In contrast, amid increasing concerns in English language universities about decolonizing education and adopting anti-racist practices, English language scholars are now starting to interrogate the cultural assumptions that underlie academic norm. In particular, much recent work by scholars such as Flores, Jensen and Thompson, Poe and Warner et al. Is examining how to ensure academic literacy does not become a barrier to higher education access. These scholars are questioning whether traditional academic literacy norms perpetuate exclusion of certain groups and are exploring more inclusive approaches. So while French and English universities have historically prioritized different aspects of language education, both must now grapple with making academic literacy more equitable and culturally responsive. And now we're heading into the conclusion. So to recap, while the goal of this project was largely pragmatic, that is to provide a place and a hub for language resources, we uncovered some interesting avenues for exploration in the future. These include exploring how a relationship with language can be leveraged in education and why English language institutions do not seem to engage with this concept. Looking at how to incorporate professional usages of language into teacher education program. Interrogating the cultural preoccupation with linguistic codes, largely at French universities, and academic language conventions at both French and English universities. Questioning how a strong adherence to linguistic codes may act as a barrier to higher education for minority groups, especially around questions of equity and diversity in education. Exploring how technology and artificial intelligence will affect our concerns about academic standards and academic literacy. Because while raising ethical concerns, these technologies also offer to support reading and writing in academia, perhaps ensuring a greater equity for groups traditionally excluded. As AI language models become increasingly sophisticated, they could help lower barriers to academic literacy, but we need to be careful about the implications. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Merci beaucoup pour tout le monde. Les références sont ici, puis je vous encourage encore une fois de visiter notre site web qui est le CICLE ICLE. Merci beaucoup.